It was close to 2:45 a.m. when Eli finally pushed his chair back from the desk, rubbing his tired eyes. The glow from his laptop lit the small dorm room with a cold, blue light. Outside, the wind pressed against the old building's windows, making it would creak and shift as if the structure itself were tired of winter. Eli stared at the half-written essay in front of him, a critique of romantic morality in 19th century literature, and sighed. He couldn't concentrate. Not really. Carter hadn't called in 3 days. Long distance was harder than he'd expected. They'd promised to make it work when Carter moved to Berlin for a fellowship. But promises only stretched so far when time zones, silence, and loneliness got involved. Eli stared at his phone again, hoping a message might have arrived without him noticing. Still nothing. Just the old wallpaper of the two of them at last summer's Pride Parade, smiling like nothing could ever chip away at that joy. Eli leaned back, the chair squeaking under his weight, and let his mind drift earlier that week, to Professor Morgan's seminar. The class had been discussing the sorrows of young Werther, and Eli had felt the professor's gaze land on him more than once during the reading of certain passages. There was a moment when Morgan had quoted a line aloud, "I am proud of my heart alone. It is the sole source of everything, all our strength, happiness, and misery," and his voice had dropped just slightly as his eyes met Eli's. It made Eli's stomach twist, not uncomfortably, but in that curious way that suggested a part of him liked the attention. Professor Morgan was in his mid-40s, always well put together in quartered blazers. He carried himself like someone born in the wrong era, quoting poetry like it was small talk. There was a quiet intensity in how he looked at people, not intrusive, but weighted. When Eli had stayed back after class once to clarify an assignment, Morgan had asked questions that veered gently away from academics. "Are you enjoying campus life? Are you adjusting all right?" And there was a moment when the professor had gently touched his elbow as he spoke. Too brief to be considered inappropriate, but enough to make Eli remember it later. He knew the rules, knew the boundaries, but he also knew how confusing things got when you were young, lonely, and someone older looked at you like they saw something more than just a student. By 3 a.m., Eli couldn't keep his eyes open. He pushed his laptop aside, curled up on the bed without even changing, and let sleep take him, heavy, dreamless, overdue. But then the door creaked. He wasn't sure how long he'd been out, but when he opened his eyes, a silhouette stood at the door, framed by the hallway's faint emergency lighting. "Eli," a low voice said. He blinked. It took him a moment to register it. Professor Morgan was standing in his doorway. "Professor?" Eli sat up abruptly, confused. "Is everything okay?" Morgan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He was still in his overcoat, scarf loose around his neck. "I saw your light earlier when I passed by on the way back from the faculty lounge," he said softly. "Just wanted to check if everything's all right." "Late night?" Eli nodded, heart thudding. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep." Morgan looked around the room, books on the floor, notes scattered, coffee mug half full. He smiled faintly. "I remember those nights. Too much to say, not enough space in the paper." "Exactly," Eli said, forcing a smile, "and other stuff on my mind." Morgan's gaze lingered. The personal always bleeds into the academic, especially with the topics we cover. He took a step closer. "Sometimes what we write says more about us than we intend." Eli nodded slowly, unsure what was happening, unsure how to react. "I guess." There was a silence, heavy but not awkward. Then Morgan tilted his head. "You know, Werther was never just about unrequited love. It was about a longing so deep it blurred the lines of morality." Eli swallowed. "And consequences." Morgan's lips curved faintly. "Yes, but in the moment, it never feels wrong. Just inevitable." Neither of them spoke for a beat. The only sound was the low hum of the radiator. Eli's eyes dropped to the professor's hand, resting by his side, still gloved, still clenched, and then back to his face. Morgan stepped a little closer. "I should go," he murmured, but made no move to leave. Eli didn't say a word, didn't tell him to stay, didn't tell him to go either. And in the quiet space between heartbeats, something unspoken passed through the room. Not quite action, not quite restraint, just an understanding. Something had shifted. The clock ticked to 3:01. Eli didn't remember standing up, but somehow there he was, half out of bed, facing Professor Morgan in the middle of his dimly lit room. The silence stretched like a wire pulled tight between them. Eli's chest rose and fell, his breath shallow, heart pounding beneath the thin cotton of his T-shirt. Morgan's coat was still buttoned at the collar, but his scarf had slipped loose, revealing the soft shadows along his neck. He looked tired, yes, but something else flickered behind his eyes, something unreadable and dangerous. "I didn't mean to wake you," Morgan said finally, voice low, almost apologetic. "I just thought you might need someone to talk to." Eli didn't respond right away. His mouth felt dry. He nodded slightly and gestured toward the desk chair. "You can sit if you want." Morgan lowered himself into the chair, placing his gloves on the table beside Eli's scattered notes. "You're working on the essay, aren't you?" "Trying to," Eli said, settling onto the edge of the bed again. "It's hard to write about romantic despair when you're in the middle of something that feels pretty close to it." Morgan tilted his head. "Carter?" Eli hesitated. "Yeah." The professor didn't press. He just nodded slowly, as if he understood all too well. "I remember the distance. It's not just miles. It's silence. Missed calls. Mismatched time zones. You start wondering if love can exist in the gaps." Eli looked down at his hands, fingers laced tight. "You've been through it?" Morgan leaned back. "My partner moved to Paris for a research grant. Said we'd be fine. I waited, called, wrote letters, and then one day he stopped replying. Ghosted like a teenager. That was 8 years ago." There was something raw in his voice now, something Eli hadn't heard in the classroom. The man behind the curated quotes and carefully timed lectures was here, fully present and unguarded. Eli's voice softened. "That must have hurt." Morgan met his eyes. "You don't realize how quiet life can become until the silence is all you hear." Eli shifted, unsure what to say. He felt exposed, like the air itself was listening. Morgan stood abruptly, moving to the window. He stared out into the dark courtyard, hands clasped behind his back. "Loneliness can be louder than heartbreak," he said, almost to himself. "It echoes." Eli rose too, something about the tension between them drawing him closer. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "you just want to be seen, even if it's only for a moment." Morgan turned, and for a long second they just stood there, the unspoken swirling between them. "I see you, Eli," he said finally, his voice nearly a whisper. The words felt heavier than they should have. Eli looked away, suddenly unsure where the edge was, and whether he'd already stepped past it. Morgan took a small step forward. "We don't have to talk about it, not if it's too much. But if there's something you need to say or not say, I'm listening." Eli looked up. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I miss Carter, or if I just miss being held." Morgan's expression didn't change, but his body did. He relaxed slightly, almost imperceptibly, and his hand moved, slowly without pressure, to rest gently on Eli's forearm. The warmth of the contact sent a ripple through Eli's chest, and still, he didn't pull away. "There's nothing wrong with wanting comfort," Morgan said. "But this isn't right," Eli whispered. Morgan nodded, his eyes searching Eli's face. "No, but sometimes wrong things feel like home, just for a little while." Eli let the words settle, his heartbeat loud in his ears. The space between them closed with a single breath. Morgan's hand slid upward to Eli's shoulder, firm but careful. Eli didn't move. Morgan leaned forward slightly, his forehead brushing Eli's for the briefest moment. Just a shared stillness, a borrowed pause in the noise. "You don't have to want this," Morgan murmured, his voice shaking now. "Just say the word." Eli didn't speak. His hand found Morgan's coat lapel, fingers curling instinctively. And then, for a heartbeat, there was no line. A single moment passed where everything slowed. The whisper of the wind outside, the hum of the radiator, the ache of solitude collapsing into human touch. No kiss, no confession, just the closeness of two people who shouldn't, caught in the gravity of what they needed. Eli stepped back first. "I think I need to sleep," he said, voice uneven. Morgan didn't argue. He nodded slowly and backed away. "Of course." I shouldn't have. I didn't stop you, Eli said quickly, cutting off his apology. Morgan gave him a look, one of understanding, not regret, and turned toward the door. Good night, Eli. The door clicked softly behind him. Eli stood there alone, breath unsteady, hands still tingling. The room felt heavier somehow, but clearer too, as though a storm had come and gone, without anyone noticing it. He crawled back into bed, but this time sleep didn't come easily. The sun was barely up when Eli opened his eyes. The sky outside his window was a dull gray, the kind that signaled the cold was far from over. His body felt heavy, not from sleep, but from everything left unsaid. The room was still exactly as it had been. Paper scattered, laptop glowing in sleep mode, a coffee cup half full and cold. And yet, everything inside him had shifted. He sat up slowly, glancing toward the door, as if it might open again. But it didn't. There was no sign that Professor Morgan had ever been there. No scent of his cologne lingering in the air, no forgotten gloves on the desk. Only the memory of a hand on his shoulder, the presser's shared breath, and the tension of what never fully happened. Eli stood and moved toward his desk, turning on the screen. The essay still sat unfinished. He stared at the blinking cursor, but his mind wasn't on romantic tragedy anymore. It was on what to do next, on what it meant that he hadn't said no, that he'd let the moment sit, expand, and nearly take over. His phone buzzed. A message from Carter lit up the screen. Hey, I know it's been a rough few days. I've missed you. Can we talk later tonight? Eli stared at the text for a long time. His thumbs hovered over the screen, but no words came. What would he say? That he hadn't cheated, technically, but had stepped so close to the line it blurred? That he hadn't been thinking about Carter when Morgan leaned in? That, in fact, he hadn't been thinking at all? He set the phone down and stood by the window, arms crossed. Below, students moved across the icy sidewalk, bundled in scarves and coffee cups. Life carried on, but inside him, everything felt suspended. Later that morning, he walked into Professor Morgan's classroom. The overhead lights were bright, the room already half full. Eli took his usual seat near the window, eyes fixed on the podium. Morgan entered right on time, as always. Nothing out of place, no sign of unease. But when he handed out the graded essays, his hand paused for the briefest moment on Eli's paper. An A+, and beneath the grade, a note written in neat cursive. Sometimes what we dare not say finds its way into our work. Keep exploring. M. Eli read it twice. 3 times. His fingers tightened around the edge of the page. There was no apology in the note, no guilt, just a subtle acknowledgement of what had passed between them. An echo, not a confession. The rest of the lecture blurred. He couldn't focus on the poetry or the themes. All he could think about was how thin the air had felt in his room, how easy it had been to forget the world when someone finally saw you, even if that someone wasn't supposed to. After class, Eli waited until everyone had left before gathering his things. As he turned to go, Morgan looked up from his bag. Good work, Eli, he said, his tone polite but neutral. Thanks, Eli said, then hesitated. About last night, Morgan's eyes lifted to meet his. We both let it go too far. Eli nodded, but nothing happened. No, Morgan agreed, but something almost did, and that matters. Eli didn't know what to say. There was no anger between them, just the weight of an almost. I'm not sure what it meant, Eli admitted. Morgan gave a faint smile. You don't have to know. Just think about what it is you truly want, and whether it's about being desired or being known. Eli nodded and left without another word. Back in his room, he sat on the bed, the weight of everything settling on his shoulders. He picked up his phone again. Carter's message was still there, waiting unread. He opened the chat. For a moment, he almost typed, I miss you too. Almost, but instead, his fingers moved differently. We need to talk. He hit send, then placed the phone down gently on the pillow. The truth wasn't a single moment at 3 a.m. It wasn't a hand on his shoulder or a professor's breath near his cheek. It was the silence that followed, the quiet reckoning of what he really wanted, who he really was, and he'll become a stranger first, himself or the man thousands of miles away. Eli lay back on the bed, eyes open to the soft light above. No answers, just clarity. And sometimes that was enough to begin.